welcome everybody to the ideaXme show, the show that profiles the humans behind the really big ideas that are shaping our world and inspiring future creation. And for all those that love really great stories, I'm Ira Pastor, your health, aging, and longevity ambassador on this journey. And over the last few shows, we've been journeying around sort of this biological architecture of life, spending a lot of our time somewhere between the organism as a whole, its physiological networks, its processes, and the world of the cell, genes, proteins, gene regulatory networks. However, while each of us is made up of an estimated 50 trillion cells or so, each one of those cells contains an estimated 100 trillion or so atoms, and represents a atomic, subatomic realm that few of us in the wet and warm world of biology really ever have a reason to segue into. Yet back in 1944, world-famous physicist Erwin Schrödinger authored a book entitled "What is Life? The Physical Aspect of the Living Cell," which was really the first foray into this new thinking that really had tried to bridge the macro world of biology with the atomic world of physics and the subatomic world of quantum mechanics and all its, as Einstein would refer to it, its spookiness. And in it, this domain, which contains these really unique themes of entanglement and wave-particle duality and ghost-like behaviors of particle tunneling, it is indeed spooky. So today's guest, who's going to take us a little further along these themes and how we find ourselves at this unified bleeding edge discipline known as quantum biology, and why we should care about it, is Professor Johnjoe McFadden. Professor McFadden is a professor of molecular genetics at the University of Surrey in the UK. With a PhD in biochemistry, he spent many years doing in-depth research in a wide range of disciplines, including microbial genetics, studying a range of organisms, including tuberculosis and meningitis, and developing important diagnostic tests for these agents. He's published hundreds of scientific articles on a wide range of subjects, from bacterial genetics, TB, idiopathic diseases, computer modeling of evolution. Has been instrumental in creating new models of human consciousness with his conscious electromagnetic information field theory of consciousness, and has been involved in authoring numerous books, including two which are quite pertinent to today's discussion, which include Quantum Evolution and then, of course, Life on the Edge, the Coming Age of Quantum Biology. So with that introduction, Professor McFadden, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Ira, and it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Definitely, definitely. So just to start out, we typically give the guests the floor. I'd like to just hear more about you, your background, where you grew up, how you got interested in science, how you got interested in biochemistry, and then ultimately what led you to this, what we'll repeatedly call a very bleeding edge field of quantum biology.
Okay, well, that's going deeper than I expected, but happy to do that. So I was born in Ireland, in the west coast, northwest coast of Ireland, in a county called Donegal, remote, bad weather, but beautiful. But sadly, well, kind of sadly, I left when I was 5 with my family, migrated to England, and I grew up in a town in the centre of the UK called Coventry, where I lived until I was 18, and then went to college in London to study biochemistry, and then went on there to do a PhD at Imperial College on microbial genetics, and that kind of drifted me into more towards genetics, and I worked in that kind of area for a while, worked in human genetics, then moved into microbial genetics, and then I got bumped into this peculiar area of quantum biology through a rather odd route. At the time, in the 1990s, now we're up to the 1990s, a paper came out, it was early 1990s, I can't remember exactly, by a very eminent microbial geneticist called John Cairns, worked at MIT, at Harvard, worked with Watson and Crick. So very eminent scientist. He brought out a paper which knocked the microbial genetics, well, all of the genetics and the evolutionary scientists around the world knocked them out of their socks. It was a paper which claimed that mutations could become more frequent when they provided an advantage to a bacterial cell. So this smacks of one of the heresies, if you like, of biology and particularly evolutionary theory, Lamarckian evolution.
Mm-hmm.
That an organism could evolve in a certain direction. These were bacteria that he plated onto plates in which they couldn't grow unless they mutated a particular gene that would allow them to grow. And these bacteria seem to have an ability to mutate that gene and not other genes, or at least at a much higher mutation rate of that particular gene.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't be accounted for by anything we knew in biology at the time. It was we think of how evolution occurs. There's two, if you like, mechanisms involved. One is that variation is generated by mutation. And that's thought to be an entirely random process. And it makes sense because the kind of agents that we know cause mutations, like radiation or heat damage or carcinogens, they're not specific for different genes. They tend to hit any gene. So that causes random variation. And then the direction of evolution is provided by natural selection. That's ultimately the theory that was put together in the early 20th century, putting Mendelian genetics together with understanding of mutation with Darwinian evolutionary theory. And this went completely against that because there's no way that an organism should be able to choose which gene it needs to mutate. So it created a huge furor in the biological community, letters flying to Nature and lots of discussion going on. And working in microbial genetics, which is the area this came from, it was a work on bacteria. I knew about the work, obviously, and was intrigued, fascinated, and thought, wow, this is something really, either this is wrong or it's really interesting. And at the time I was reading one of the first popular science books about quantum mechanics. It was John Gribbin's Schrodinger's Cat, which is a really excellent book, a groundbreaking book. And it came at a time when in popular science, quantum mechanics wasn't really very well known. There were loads of books about general relativity and black holes and time travel and all that kind of stuff. But then I read Schrodinger's Cat by John Gribbin and I thought, wow, I thought black holes were weird. Quantum mechanics is way weirder than black holes or time travel or anything like that. It really is totally bizarre. And it really makes you think that what we understand about the world is actually a kind of gloss. And really the world at a deeper level is much stranger than we think it is. And that strangeness includes the ability of particles to, for example, be in many places at once. I knew that DNA is a single molecule. DNA is what mutates when mutations take place. And some of those mutations involve just the motion of single particles, protons. Protons are involved in the genetic code. In fact, they are really the genetic code. Genetic code is made up of positions of protons. Mm-hmm. It occurred to me that if a proton can be in multiple places at once, then it could also perhaps allow the DNA to be in multiple genetic states at once. And that could, in a very kind of hand-wavy kind of way, it could provide some kind of explanation, I thought, for how adaptive mutations, as these peculiar mutations that John Cairns had identified were called. Of course, you know, my knowledge of physics was reading John Cairns, my knowledge of quantum mechanics was reading Gribbin's book, so I knew I didn't know enough to make sense of this. So I phoned up the physics department and spoke to some people here at Surrey in the physics department, and they said, well, sounds interesting, why don't you come and give us a seminar? Which I was very wary of, but I accepted. You know, going to talk physics to coming to tell quantum physicist how the quantum world works. It's something I wasn't particularly enamored at the idea of doing. But anyway, I went over, gave a seminar on this idea, and it was very skeptically, quite rightly, very skeptically received by the audience. Very skeptical of the idea that quantum mechanics could be involved in biological stuff. And that's because, and this is very important to understand really what's peculiar about quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics operates at the level of electrons, single protons. Mm-hmm. And it's extremely important. It's vital for understanding their dynamics. But when, instead of single molecules, single particles, you have thousands or trillions in a gram of salt, or be a trillion atoms and trillions of particles. When you get trillions of molecules or atoms or particles working together, then it kind of washes out the quantum mechanical stuff. They kind of get all averaged to zero. And this is a process we know as decoherence. And it's one of the reasons, maybe not the only one, for why the world appears classical to us, and it isn't as weird, and we don't see the weirdness in large things, large stuff. So everyone thinks of biological organisms, even bacteria, which are microscopic, but they're still vast compared to the size of an atom. So it wasn't really thought that quantum mechanics really ought to be operating at the level of whole bacterial cells, or even genes, also thought to be too big. So everyone was pretty skeptical. But in the audience was Jim Al-Khalili, who was a particle physicist working here at Surrey at the time. And he came up to me afterwards and we had a chat about it. And he said he was interested in the possibility, and maybe we could work something out. So we met up over a period of about a year or two, maybe a year and a half, over a coffee or a beer, and we'd thrash out a few ideas until we eventually managed to put something together that made some kind of sense. A paper which was on a quantum mechanical explanation for adaptive mutations, which we published in something like 1999, I think. So that we published that. Didn't make a big impact in the field, and adaptive mutations then got kind of messy. Wasn't clear what was going on. It was shown there were many more things going on than what the original researchers had realized. But anyway, by this time I had become really intrigued by the way I was thinking about quantum mechanics and the way I was thinking about how genes work. And I was kind of thinking, well, okay, big things like whole cells shouldn't operate according to quantum rules, but the things about how life works, it manipulates single particles. Enzymes, for example, they will take one molecule and twist and turn it, attach it to another molecule, and then pull them apart again. Now that's taking place at the level of single molecules. Mm-hmm. That is going to be bumping into quantum mechanics. Similarly, DNA replication will be bumping into quantum mechanics. The mutation process, as I mentioned before, should be bumping into quantum mechanics. So it occurred to me that it may well be that whether or not adaptive mutations was a phenomenon or not, life should have been dealing with quantum mechanics for 3.5 billion years. And it may have found various tricks to using and operating at that quantum level, which we're not used to using and operating at a macroscopic level that we live in the world around us. So anyway, I went on to write a book about this, Quantum Evolution, which was published in 2000. Once again, it didn't really make too much of a splash. I don't think I convinced too many people. And then both Jim and I went back to our day jobs, working on microbial genetics, Jim working on his particle physics. We just carried on. Occasionally we'd meet up and discuss, this looks like an interesting paper, may have something interesting to do with quantum biology. But then towards in the millennium, things started to get interesting in quantum biology. Suddenly some papers started to appear, which, for example, found evidence for proton tunneling in enzyme action, evidence for quantum entanglement in avian navigation, evidence for quantum coherence in photosynthesis. And suddenly, it wasn't considered a sign of madness to be claiming that quantum mechanics was involved in biology. So Jim and I started to get more excited and interested and tried to get into this field ourselves, but we didn't manage to get any funding for the area in the UK. There wasn't a lot of zero funding for quantum biology. It was still treated very skeptically by the funding bodies, but we ran a few workshops on quantum biology, and it was still a small field. You could get everyone working in quantum biology into a fairly small meeting room. And then at some point, at about 2012, I guess, we decided to write Life on the Edge to kind of update the story that I'd written about in 2000 in quantum evolution, and write about all the fantastic stuff that's been done by many other scientists showing quantum effects in everything from avian navigation to photosynthesis, etc. So we wrote that book, and that helped, I think, to stimulate more interest in the area, and it also, I think, helped to get us some funding. So we've set up at the University of Surrey now a quantum biology doctoral training center. So we're training PhD students to work in this area because it requires an exceptionally broad range of skills. I mean, I learned biochemistry, Jim learned physics. What we really need is students who know both biochemistry and physics and quantum physics. So in order to work in this area of quantum biology, we feel we need to train another generation, a generation of scientists who can work across the disciplines. And that's what we're doing in our Quantum Biology Doctoral Training Center, funded by the Leaving Trust here at Surrey. And we've got our first tranche of about 10 students working next door to me here. And so we're very excited about that, and it allows us to actually now do some work. So we have some work doing this kind of experiments to look for whether quantum tunneling is involved in mutation, the kind of interest that myself and Jim got interested in, and lots of other stuff as well, working photosynthesis, faction, and avian navigation. So finally we're able to do some work in this fascinating area, and we're really excited that we're finally moving forward, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute some really exciting stuff in the not so distant future.
That is extremely exciting to hear, and I love the concept, especially sort of myself coming out of the pharmaceutical industry, where you have all these different disciplines, biology and chemistry, now some biophysics and physiology, and too often they don't talk to each other.
Yeah,
it's one of the reasons that drug development takes so damn long, and it's really nice to see that you're putting together this sort of cross-functional dynamic. And I thought one of the wonderful things in Life on the Edge, sort of the way you laid out sort of this the big whys of quantum biology, and sort of the importance, why in 2019 it is so important to converge, let's say, these ideas, and whether they had to do with the efficiency of photosynthesis or the preciseness of magnetonavigation, or the sort of the exceptional speed of DNA repair and sort of the flow of consciousness through the human brain. I think you do a wonderful job in sort of explaining the unknowns of where we lose things, or whether we run up against that brick wall in biology, and why we need these sort of convergent knowledge sets to come together to hammer things out, which I thought was really great. One area which, and I know I don't mean to use more science fiction-ish style words, but one area that I see some discussion about lately in the literature, and I know it's quite early, but it has to do with sort of the, and once again, these are probably inappropriate words, but whether we say the gateway or the transmission receiver dynamics that sort of merges the quantum domain with the grander macro system. I look around the literature and I see a variety of themes and folks that are trying to take a stab at this one, some of which are complicated, some of which are extremely complicated. Some folks that work in sort of the area of water biology talk about these water gel state transitions and the sort of this endless array of crystallochemical structures that water can create that may be able to create these coherent, quantized states. More specifically on the CNS front, you have the Hameroff-Penrose model talking about microtubules acting as sort of quantum computing devices. And then you get into some really over my head sort of esoteric physics topics. Some people talk about the potential involvement of radical pair mechanisms and spin chemistry. Others talk about something known as the Zeeman interaction and how you split magnetic fields. Really deep ideas, but it would be nice if you could sort of give your thoughts and sort of the simplification of where sort of this particular area is going, because I know that connection between the two realms. I know, it boggled Einstein and all those, but it'd be interesting just to hear your thoughts on that matter and where it's
it's always pretty impossible to predict where science is going, but the issues that I think are key. First, the first thing is, I think, the way that we are thinking about the science that we're doing here at Surrey, and I think most of the other quantum biology groups, is you have to start on firm ground. And you have to be sure there is a phenomenon that is worth investigating. And really that comes down to asking the question, do you have evidence that this phenomenon that you're looking at can't be accounted for by simple classical processes? And this is, I think, the first test to identify an area that is potentially amenable to quantum mechanics. So, the photosynthesis, DNA mutation, the experiments that Thurston Ritz and the Wutschgals have done on avian navigation, all of these are very hard to account for by standard classical explanations. So then you kind of say, okay, well, maybe there's something there. But then you've got to be rigorous and really try to keep the science as hard-nosed as possible and be as skeptical as possible about what's going on. But then there are really interesting questions that immediately kind of come up. The biggest question, probably in quantum biology at the moment, is how is it that quantum coherence is maintained? It goes back to the kind of question that when I gave that talk back in 1999 or so to the physics department, I said, it's never going to happen. There's too much noise. By noise, I mean too much molecular noise, vibrations, randomness going on in biological systems. When physicists want to detect things like quantum coherence, entanglement, superposition, they have to do their experiments at close as, within a whisker of absolute zero, minus 270 degrees centigrade, in order to slow down all the vibrations. Every atom at room temperature a table may look still, but if you look at a single atom, its atoms are vibrating like mad at a really high frequency. That kind of random vibration of stuff is what causes this process of decoherence that destroys all the quantum mechanical stuff, the big complex stuff. And you don't see quantum mechanical behavior like coherence, superposition, entanglement in big stuff. So that was the criticism then. We now know that despite that, we still see quantum mechanical coherence and entanglement and stuff like this in biological systems. The question is, how? When everything we know about quantum mechanical stuff should be that should be destroyed very quickly in a hot, wet system, like all living cells have to. They can only operate above 0 degrees C, and that's already 273 degrees above absolute zero, the kind of temperatures that physicists have to go to in order to detect quantum effects. So how is it that life's managing this? This is the biggest and most interesting challenge, because how life has cracked it could make huge impact on how we can crack it technologically as well. As you probably know, there's big efforts to develop quantum computers. And quantum computers, the size of your phone, could outperform a classical computer the size of the galaxy. So they are extraordinarily powerful computers if we could make one. And the problem is to do all the quantum stuff, it's really hard to keep it at the quantum level and do a calculation sufficiently complex that it's worth doing. You can add 2 and 2, but we know what the answer is.
Mm-hmm.
Do really difficult computations requires making a quantum computer big and complex enough that the vibrations kick in, all of the noise kicks in, and it's hard to keep the system coherent. If we knew how life manages to essentially compute at the quantum mechanical level, then maybe we can work out how to do it technologically. But also, to me, I think it's also goes down to the fundamental question. I'm a biologist, so I was always, going back to, how did you come into this? I was always fascinated by biology. Go down to the seaside and I would be rooting around in the rock pools, trying to catch little creatures and examine them, looking at them in the pool in a little pot and touching sea anemones and finding sea urchins. And I find that fascinating. And it's always been a fascinating question when you see the difference between living stuff, like, a sea anemone, you touch it, boom, and it just retracts, just like that. It has such sensitivity, it is so dynamic, and you look at a rock next door to it, you touch it, nothing. There's such a big difference between them, and yet they're basically made out of the same kind of materials, different proportions, but the same kind of materials. And what is it that makes life so special? That has always been the question that has most provoked me into thinking about science. That's always the one that has driven me. What is life? How do we understand it? And this is the answer that we came to in Life on the Edge, and I also explored in Quantum Evolution back in 2000, is that really what's different about life is it's discovered ways of doing quantum stuff at room temperature, at the temperatures that that living organisms live at. And that's what makes life so different from inanimate stuff. So I think that's really, really, to me, the most interesting and fascinating question that we're exploring. Consciousness is also a fascinating one. But I think, again, we have to be very careful. The kind of stuff that you mentioned also about water and water. There are areas where there's a lot of wacky science that gets done, and experiments that can only be done in a single lab, or someone does an experiment and then claims huge things about, if you read some of the literature on consciousness that claim experiments that show quantum entanglement, that means we've explained telepathy. No, we haven't. So we've got to be rigorous about all of the science that we do. And in the area of, say, consciousness, I think the quantum mechanics may well have something to play, but we've got to be really rigorous and find out, okay, what phenomenon can we show quantum mechanical phenomena are taking place? And we have a PhD project we'll be looking at this starting next year, looking at ion channels. And ion channels are these essentially tiny tubes which allow single ions to pass through those tubes. And they're responsible for nerve firing. They are what makes our nerves fire. So they're responsible at one level for thought. And there's already theoretical evidence that they may be involved for something called quantum coherence, that ions may go as a wave, if you like, rather than as a particle going through this tube. They go as a wave through the tube. So we have a PhD project to investigate that, which will be kicking off later this year. So trying to take a practical problem and apply the best science that we can throw at it, really answer it, and not going beyond the conclusions of any particular experiment. And this is, I think, where the consciousness field is kind of messy, and so many claims are made with so little evidence. If you make an extraordinary claim, extraordinary claim needs extraordinary evidence. And to claim that quantum mechanics is involved in how the brain works is an extraordinary claim.
Sure.
In order to make that claim, we need an extraordinary level of evidence. And so far, we haven't got it. It could be that quantum mechanics is involved in consciousness, but there isn't strong evidence to make that case at the moment. There's only kind of, well, we don't really understand consciousness, and we don't really understand quantum mechanics, so, well, they're probably related. They may be, but that isn't a good argument to pursue a scientific program.
Much appreciated, and I also appreciate your your discussion on the importance of scientific rigor and reproducibility, especially as it pertains to something as new as this. But sort of with that, and sort of looking at some of the, I don't want to take you too far into the future, but I'm sure whether it's 5 years or 50 years, I'm sure you do think about once you gather more of this data and whatever happens over the next decade through this program, I'm sure you are sort of looking or thinking about sort of looking through the window what some of the near term, let's say, translational possibilities may be. You have here out at University of California at Berkeley, you have Dr. Luke Lee at the Institute of Quantitative Biosciences. He gives lectures on rather obscure topics such as bio-nanophotonics and potential for gene regulation using photons and beams of light. About a topic of quantum nanoscopes in terms of diagnostics and in sort of real-time imaging of plasmons and quasi-particles and things of this nature. Once again, this is really high-level stuff that only probably a few people really grasp at this point, but are there any sort of near-term translational opportunities that you dream about as you still work on the basic side?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're working, doing work, for example, on photosynthesis. Now, photosynthesis, there are lots of steps in photosynthesis. And at the end of the day, the tree isn't trying to optimize photosynthesis, it's trying to optimize making more trees. So it's doing a lot of things. But there is a particular step in photosynthesis that has the highest efficiency of any energy transport known to man, any energy transport process known to man. And that is when, in a photosystem, when it captures a photon and it has to deliver it from one place to another place. It captures it in a molecule of chlorophyll, and then it has to deliver the energy to something called the reaction center. When it captures it in a state that's unstable. And if it doesn't manage to get from here to here very quickly, it will be lost. Normally, you would expect that to have efficiency 30, 40 or so %. In optimal conditions, in plants photosynthesis or microbial photosynthesis, it has an efficiency of 100% as far as we can measure. So it does this better than anything we can do in terms of energy transport. Now, what does the world need? Energy. Where do we lose an awful lot of the energy that we are generating? It's in transport. A huge amount of energy is lost in transport. If we're going to understand how photosynthesis manages to do this, then maybe we can make better systems. But also, it is a step in photosynthesis and we are, of course, wanting to make clean energy. And clean energy, the easiest source of clean energy is, of course, the sun. I think it was another scientist, I forgot his name, who pointed out that you can deliver all of the energy needs of the entire world in an area from the solar energy that you could capture in so many miles or so of the Sahara. You could efficiently harvest it. So there's loads of energy out there. Mm-hmm. You can capture that more easily, perhaps in better solar cells that would capture solar energy and deliver it as electricity to our homes, to our factories, etc. And we are already working on projects in which we are trying to put photosystems, such as you have in microbes and plants, onto nanotechnology. So we also have a big nanotechnology input into our quantum biology center here, and a synthetic biology center input as well. So taking a photosystem from a microbe, engineering it in a way that we can then attach it to a carbon nanotube or a carbon nanoparticle that we can then turn into a material that could perhaps efficiently harvest solar energy. So that could be one near-term, hopefully near-term output. Other areas that are, for instance, in enzymes, how enzymes work. Enzymes, the target of every drug that we have in the world is an enzyme. If we understand better how they work, then we can maybe target drugs better and design drugs that work better than the current. Kind of how we design drugs these days mostly is a kind of trial and error process. If we understand how enzymes work at the level of particles, then we can really maybe make some inroads to understanding how to make drugs work better. So that's another potential avenue. There are many more. For instance, understanding the avian navigation system, we have a project which is working with Dr. Alex Jones at the National Physics Laboratory, who has engineered neurons to be sensitive to magnetic fields. And that could be used for sensing of magnetic fields in some navigational devices, perhaps. So there are lots of potential applications that are near, and then much further away, I kind of see that, as Richard Feynman said, what I can't make, I don't understand. And we can't make life except by the messy process that we've been doing for 3.5 billion years. That's the only way we can make life. And that's kind of a bit surprising. We kind of think of bacteria as being simple. Well, why aren't they simple to make? No one's ever made a bacterial cell from scratch. You can adapt, take one and change it. That's all what we do in synthetic biology at the moment. But no one can take inanimate stuff and turn it into living stuff without any input from already living stuff. And if we were able to do that, make life from the bottom up, then it allows us to engineer microbes that could perhaps be used to degrade pollutants, to more efficiently harvest light, to go into our cells and kill cancer cells. It gives us a whole different area of synthetic biology that is really making new life. Obviously, there are all sorts of interesting issues with that kind of stuff, but I think it's a possibility of making life rather than just changing life. Modifying life is a very exciting one.
It's staggering, and it's so refreshing to hear in today's day and age with you know, some of the sort of the older topics that get cycled around so much that folks like yourselves are really thinking on the, you know, you're standing on this precipice of possibilities, and it's just extremely exciting. And I can imagine what it's like for you every day coming into work and dealing with these topics. But it's truly mind-bending, and I really appreciate you sharing this all with us. Yeah, and most of it, of course, you know, for the audience will sound like science fiction. And it's sort of this point of the show, before we wrap up, that I have to give our guest a truly science fiction oriented question. But people want to know, you know, if you had the opportunity now, and so we're taking Professor McFadden and we're allowing you to travel in a time machine to the past, to the future, who, Einstein, Bohr, Schrodinger, your great-great-grandparents, your great-great-grandchildren, somebody you would like to meet that you couldn't meet and talk to, who would you like to meet and what would you like to talk to them about?
Okay, that's an interesting one. You know, I think, you know, meeting someone like Charles Darwin, Einstein, etc., would be great and really interesting. But actually, I think it would be more interesting in a way to go deeper. And I think one of the most interesting things is to see how different other minds can work. And really, if I wanted to really meet a mind that was different from my own, I'd go and meet a Neanderthal and try to find out how their mind works. Because I have a feeling that a lot of the way that we think about the world is actually just a tiny fraction of the different kinds of way we can think about the world. Or, you know, maybe not a Neanderthal, I'm not sure if they could talk, no one's really sure, but another human, and see how they were making out the world. When those early humans were kind of painting those caves in Lascaux in France, what were they thinking of? Why were they doing it? Those people who built Stonehenge, why were they doing it?
Exactly.
I think those questions that are, Einstein could tell me a lot about, he could tell me a lot about quantum mechanics, I'm sure, though he didn't actually believe it in the end. He didn't like quantum mechanics,
Right.
Planck or Bohr or whatever. Darwin could tell me about evolution, but those have been absorbed into our culture. Things that haven't been absorbed, I think, would be maybe more interesting to go back and find, okay, what did we lose along the way? And what different ways there are of thinking about the world that we might have been completely missing. So I think, yeah, I'd go for an early human, meet an early human who could talk and have a chat with, and say how they, find out how they saw the world.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Wonderful answer. I very much appreciate that. So once again, Professor McFadden, I really appreciate your time to spend with us today. For everybody that's going to be watching this show, Professor Johnjoe McFadden at Surrey in the UK, author of both Quantum Evolution and Life on the Edge, The Coming Age of Quantum Biology. When the show is up, we will have links to all of Professor McFadden's books, his literature, websites, and we can take a look. It's been a pleasure and honor to have you here, and thank you so much for spending the time for the audience today.
It's been great talking to you, Ira.
Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.